Hi, Mark. Just want to let you know that we'll be live on YouTube as well.
Okay, thanks.
Perfect. Just want to let you know. Hi, Mark. We have 4 minutes to go live. I'll let the participants in at the top of the hour and then start the recording. All right.
Okay.
Okay, Mark, we are already at the top of the hour. I'll now go live and start the recording.
Okay. Good morning. I'm Mark Gorenflo, one of your learning facilitators in the Berkeley Executive Education Digital Transformation course. Welcome to office hours for week 6. So the standard logistics applies. Make sure you set the right chat settings, selecting the everyone option. And if you have questions anytime during the office hours, you can use the Zoom chat function or raise your hand using the reactions menu. Here we are already in week 6 of the course. Seems like we just started yesterday. This is one of my favorite modules on people in the organization, where we take a look at the people prong of the digital transformation model that Tom, Zolt, and Samir are teaching us all about. So here's my agenda for today. I'll do a quick review of Module 6 ideas and learnings. I'll go over a Berkeley Haas culture case study, do an overview of assignment 6, and then take a look at the capstone project status, mostly in terms of what you need to know to finish the capstone and where we are in the course in providing you with those tools. And if you have any questions during the course of the office hours, feel free to ask. So I like this week's case study because it's quite a bit different in terms of protagonist and issues that are being faced than a lot of the case studies that we have had up to this point in the course. So first of all, it's centered on a nonprofit, which is the Tate Museum. And it's centered on how they do a digital transformation of their engagement with their public and what organizational implications that has for the Tate itself. So this case study focuses on what's really the second digital transformation of the Tate that's led by John Stack, which is head of digital transformation at the organization. So he guided the Tate through 2 previous digital strategies and built what came to be known as the 5th gallery, which was their online gallery, which allowed them to engage a digital audience, with a specially digital created or curated content. So now the Tate wants to go beyond kind of creating a separate digital experience to doing kind of what DBS did in the case study that Samir talked about in his live webinar yesterday, which is how to embed digital in everything that the Tate does, both in their physical presentations and the in-person experience of the customers who come to the bricks and mortar museum and in their virtual engagement. So the questions are, how do you do this? How do you transform Tate into a truly digital organization where digital is already the norm or a norm? And should Tate increase its investment in digital or hold steady or perhaps even scale back their investment a bit? So these are all of the issues that the Tate is dealing with and trying to figure out where to go with its digital engagement strategy and organization. So in thinking about this, it's helpful to from kind of a strategy perspective, think about what digital's role in Tate's portfolio is or should be. And kind of there are three ways to think about the Tate's digital portfolio. So you could think about it as a substitute for the in-person experience. You could think about it as kind of a disruption in the usual museum model, where you completely upend the experience, and this would pit digital to a certain extent as a competitor with or a usurper of all of the physical modalities that the Tate has built up over the years. Or you could view digital's role in the portfolio as a complement to the in-person physical experience. So what's the difference between substitute and complement? So if you view the digital's role as a substitute, it means that you would structure the organization and you would structure your outreach to your customers as a specifically digital experience, right? So there's no incentive or expectation that people who engage with the Tate's collection digitally would ever come to an in-person event at one of its physical locations. So it would be an entirely digital experience by virtual customers who you would never expect to see in person. If you view digital as kind of a complement in Tate's portfolio, then you would see how to structure the digital, or you would look to structure the digital experience so that it could, so the digital experience and the in-person experience could mutually enhance each other. Just as some ways that this could happen, digital is a great way for prospective museum visitors to prepare for their visit. They can take a look at what's any special shows that are on, and if there are tickets to get that, they could browse through the offerings that are being held in person, and they could use the digital assets of the Tate's portfolio to help prepare them for their visit. For me, I would find that particularly helpful because I get kind of museum fatigue after about, hour and a half, maybe maximum 2 hours. I'm kind of overwhelmed with the experience and I can't absorb anything more. So it would help in many cases for me to take a look at, okay, if I'm only going to be able to spend 2 hours just because of the cognitive overload that I feel when I visit the museum, what's kind of the best expenditure of my time? And digital can help you in that planning preparation. Digital is also a great complement to your enjoyment of the in-person experience. This can be done through a website experience that kind of moves with you as you move through the museum and provides additional enrichment information about a particular collection at large or any particular work of art that you come across. This could be the kind of digital experience of the digital equivalent of what many museums have, which is audio headsets that you can put on and listen to a curator describe specific works of art that they think are worthy of a little bit deeper dive and more explanation of the provenance of the work of art, where it comes from, its history throughout its lifetime, and additional information about the artist, him or herself. So that's kind of a way that digital can complement the in-person experience, and they can both mutually reinforce each other and make each part of the portfolio more valuable collectively than the individual elements are by themselves. So when you're thinking about the Tate case study, the assignment in this module comes in a little bit different location. So it's kind of right in the middle of the module, and the assignment asks you to identify what changes to organizational design are needed to achieve the organizational imperatives of Tate's digital strategy. So those imperatives are listed in video 4, and you can use those imperatives to help you craft your response to assignment 6. And the good thing about the assignment is that the rest of the module helps to understand what the possible answers to this particular assignment question should be. So the whole module is designed with the idea of encouraging you to think about these issues and then providing some feedback in the module itself on ways to answer the question that Samir poses in the assignment. Then the rest of the module deals with organizational change management frameworks and kind of principles. So this is important because any digital transformation to be effective is going to need to be adopted by the organization. And in fact, the organization will almost certainly need to adapt to meet the new organizational imperatives of a digitally transformed organization or a digitally transformed process in that organization. And one of the really useful ways to think about organizational change management is the congruence model that Samir introduces in this module. So basically, there are kind of three big picture elements to the congruence module or congruence model. And there are the three fits that Samir talks about. So the fit with the external world, the fit with the internal world, and the fit across design elements. So what are these things? So basically, the fit with the external world is a way of thinking about how your organization is structured to meet the strategic imperatives of the market in which you operate. In other words, do you have the capabilities, the strategy, the resources to make your business model, whether it's actually a business or a nonprofit or government, do you have the resources to be able to meet the strategic imperatives of your mission and your business model? So that's kind of the first analysis that you would need to do. And then that's the outward looking fit. The inward looking fit is, do you have the internal capabilities to execute on the strategy that has been developed to optimize your fit with the external world? And then the fit across design elements are I view these as levers that managers have to be able to modify or adapt their organization to ensure that it has the capabilities that make it fit with the internal world, and it has the capabilities that make it fit with the strategic imperatives of the external world. So what are these design elements? Probably the most intuitive or obvious design element is formal structure. So that's basically the org chart. Formal structure is incredibly powerful. It can show kind of at a glance what's important in the organization, what has its own elements in the org chart. It shows who works for whom in any particular organization. So it implies hierarchy and structure and indicates where the power and authority lie in any particular organization. Formal structure is oftentimes the first thing that people think about when they think about organizational change. And changing the formal structure can be an extremely powerful tool. It's also a very blunt tool, and it doesn't come cost-free as a change element in your organization. Changing formal structures, particularly if they are significant changes, can cause a lot of angst and anxiety among the workforce, uncertainty about who works for whom, or whether an entire part of the organization will be hived off or disestablished in any particular formal structure change. It can really be a distraction from the business at hand as the organization tries to sort itself out. So while it's kind of the most obvious and intuitive design elements to flex or lever to pull, you really need to think carefully about when to apply it and understand the pros and cons of using it as a organizational change lever. One thing that Samir really likes to talk about are workflow and decision rights. And in fact, his discussion again of the DBS Bank case study in his live webinar focuses a lot on workflow and decision rights. in particular, how there can be formal or informal structures that lay on top of the formal structure of the organization that can really affect how the organization behaves and responds to changes and demands. So in this case, in the DBS case study, it would be Puch's creation of these kind of top-level task forces that thought about how to digitize the customer experience. And these were councils that were chaired by the CEO himself, that drew on teams across the organization, and that were empowered to make decisions about how the work was organized, where resources would flow, how to customize where customization was needed in digital systems, but ensure that there was enough standardization across the whole organization that the digital experience was uniform from place to place and was kind of executable from an IT standpoint, both in terms of implementation and then in terms of maintenance over time. So workflow and decision rights can be a really powerful lever that you can pull to get your organization to move in the direction that you want. People systems are another great lever that you have. These are basically the HR functions of the organization and entail everything from recruiting, onboarding, managing the performance, training and retraining, the compensation systems and incentives in an organization, and also, unfortunately, systems that you have in place to remove employees from the organization who either no longer have a role there or who are not constructive, productive members of the workforce. Many people view HR as, purely an overhead function of an organization, and at times a particularly bureaucratic and non-helpful function. But really successful companies, especially companies in the high-tech world, where a significant portion of their assets are actually the human capital in the company itself, pay very close attention to the systems that they have to do all of these things that I mentioned, to all of their people systems, and they view it as a strategic enabler of their company and its mission. And so careful attention to how the people systems are structured and how they support other elements of the organization can be a real force multiplier for any particular organization. And then finally, there's the culture element. Basically, any organization will develop a culture whether you pay attention to culture development or not. And so it makes sense to think about the culture that either the culture that you want to create in a new organization and what steps you can take to reinforce that particular culture, or how do you work with the culture that your organization has, understanding what the key elements of the culture are, some of which can be explicit in terms of things like the Berkeley Haas 4 defining leadership principles, and some of which can be implicit, like just understanding that if you want to undertake a project in this particular area, you're going to need to talk with this individual because they have all the back history and have considerable influence over this particular part of a company's operations. So paying attention to culture, understanding the culture that your organization has, and where possible and where necessary, working to change or tweak cultural elements can be a really important driver of change in your particular organization. So that's the congruence model. It's I think it's a very straightforward way of thinking about organizational behavior and identifying ways to engage in change management in an organization. But despite its simplicity, I find it particularly powerful. There's some other things to think about in implementing changes, including digital transformation changes. So understanding whether what type of change regime you're in. So is this a reactive change or a proactive change? So reactive change is basically closing a performance gap where that is the difference between what is and what should be. And then proactive change is closing an opportunity gap between what is and what could be. Reactive changes are always the easiest to implement because it can be pretty straightforward for all the employees in an organization to understand that they're not performing to what they should be or what if the organization isn't performing up to snuff. This is kind of the burning platform analogy, right? So when the platform is burning, everybody knows that something needs to be done and are motivated to work towards that end. So that's kind of the classic reactive change. Proactive change is a lot harder because it's a lot harder for everybody in an organization to understand what they could be doing better if they're already a fairly high-performing organization. So in this case, you would run across the, if it's not broken, don't fix it mentality, where you have an organization that's going along perfectly well and getting the members of that organization to understand that even though it's going well, it could be going way better. We have opportunities to improve our performance significantly. Selling that kind of vision can be a lot more difficult when there's no obvious burning platform to escape from. So in addition to trying to understand what change regime you're in, it's helpful to recognize that there are different phases in any particular organizational change. So the first is the kind of the mobilization phase, making the case for the changes that are needed. If it's a burning platform, then the case kind of makes itself. If it's an aspirational goal, then you have to be a lot more persuasive in your case for what changes are needed in the organization and why. And while you're building the case, you would also need to build the organizational capacity for change. So this is kind of where you, to a certain extent, unfreeze the organization and start implementing the changes that you want and building the capacity for those changes. Then you have what's called the movement phase, where you actually implement the changes, building momentum for change initiative, and preserving and continuing to build organizational capacity for change. In this particular phase, it's very helpful to identify champions that you can list to help you move the change along and to sell the change to reluctant or recalcitrant coworkers. And then once you get into the new organizational structure that you've been aiming for, you kind of refreeze the organization and work on improving the new processes that you have to achieve the new goals that you've set. Here's a kind of classic description of the different cohorts in any particular organization with respect to kind of any particular change, right? So innovators are always going to be changing things and looking for the next great innovation to implement. They and early adopters can be great thought partners in a digital transformation that you would want to undertake, and can be great early champions. Then you have the early majority cohort who see the value in the particular change and are willing to get on board. Late majority folks need to see more evidence, need to be more convinced. And then finally, for almost any particular change that you want to make, there are going to be folks who are more or less implacably opposed. So it's important to understand who those folks are early on, and it's important to find ways either to co-opt them somehow, or if necessary, to just maneuver around them. So I did want to talk a little bit about a case study that we did here at Berkeley Haas, and it focused specifically on Berkeley Haas culture. So I can send to all of you via email the actual case study write-up that was done by our former dean at the Haas School of Business, Rich Lyons, and a professor of management organization at Berkeley Haas, Jenny Chapman. So Dean Lyons was dean for a total of about 11 years. He spent some time as an interim dean, and then he came back to 2 full terms as dean at Berkeley Haas. And one of his signature initiatives during his tenure as dean was to identify and codify what we call our defining leadership principles. So these are kind of 4 catchphrases that embody how we think about doing things at Berkeley Haas. And so they're student always, question the status quo, beyond yourself, and confidence without attitude. So Dean Lyons wanted to codify these for several different reasons. But most importantly, he wanted to use them both to help drive changes in internal processes and as a way to signal to prospective staff, students, and faculty what distinguishes Haas from other top 10 business schools and from other business schools in general. So he embarked on a project working with all members of the Haas community, alumni, donors, current staff, faculty, and students, to try and codify what the culture was. So he wasn't in the business of creating a culture. He recognized that a culture existed. He recognized that the culture at Haas was part of a larger culture at UC Berkeley, which certainly has a reputation for free thinking, free speech, as well as a reputation as one of the world's great public research universities. And so he wasn't in the business of changing the culture per se. He was in the business of codifying it in a way that felt true to the current stakeholders in the Haas community, and that could be used to kind of reinforce our efforts going forward and to signal, especially to prospective students, what they could expect from a Haas learning experience. So the key elements in his drive to codify the 4 defining leadership principles was, first of all, making sure that he was in the business of defining and articulating, not creating or changing the culture at Haas, because he didn't think the culture itself needed to be changed. He paid key attention to decision rights. And in this case, UC Berkeley and Haas has what's called a shared governance model. The current dean also calls it a weak dean model. What that means is that the big decision rights are shared or are owned by the members of the tenured faculty at the university and at Haas. So things such as admission standards, the curriculum of our degree programs, who gets hired as a faculty member, how decisions are made on tenure for faculty members. All of these issues are within the purview of the faculty working as a collective corporate body. And so they have very strong decision rights that need to be observed and respected. And Dean Lyons was really careful to make sure that he partnered with the faculty in his culture codification effort, and was able to convince faculty members who weren't particularly keen on this endeavor, thinking it probably not a good expenditure of the dean's time, and especially folks in areas like economics or finance or accounting, which are very quantitative, didn't really see the value of this particular undertaking. His deal with them was, okay, I understand that you may not think it's particularly valuable, but I just ask that you don't oppose my efforts working with folks who do want to undertake this particular effort. So in that way, he was able to respect the decision rights of the faculty, identify folks who could be potential blockers, and then just work to make them neutral observers as opposed to active opponents. It turns out that this effort actually became a huge external fit benefit for the Haas School of Business, because it positioned us as a kind of a culture-driven business school, which was a great way to differentiate us from our other top 10 business school competitors. And this work on Dean Lyons' part really helped to set Haas apart from its particular competitors. So it was a really brilliant understanding on his part on how this effort really improved the fit with the external world, part of the congruence model. It was kind of an imperfect implementation and organizational capabilities, again, because there were numerous faculty members who weren't particularly interested in this, and so didn't pay it much mind or contribute much to the initiative, but they were kind of neutralized, if you were, in terms of being a blocker to this effort. And then in the fit across the design elements, Dean Lyons focused explicitly on defining an existing culture. So really digging deep into the culture lever of the congruence model design elements to elucidate them in a way that was easy to remember, that was true to the lived experience of Haas community members, and that was easy to transmit to folks outside of Haas. Once these were elucidated, the senior leadership team at Haas was really rigorous in embedding them in the people systems of the organization. So the defining leadership principles became important elements in the staff performance management system. They were really key tools in the processes that we used to recruit and onboard new faculty members. They became elements in the essay questions that we asked of prospective students in all of our degree programs, undergraduate, the 3 MBA programs, our Master of Financial Engineering program, and our PhD program. And they were also important in efforts to recruit new faculty to Haas. So it was a really great effort after the defining leadership principles were created to use them in our people systems to kind of positively reinforce the culture that had been kind of identified in these 4 principles. There's no change at all in workflow and decision rights, and there's no change at all in formal structure. So this was all really focused on culture and people systems. So what are the main takeaways that at least I have for Module 6? So organizational success depends on having the right people in the right design in your organization. And it's really important to spell out the imperatives of the digital transformation org brief, as Samir calls it, so that people understand where the organization is going, and they can use the levers that are available to them that are identified in the congruence model to move that digital transformation along. You need to make sure that all the design elements mutually reinforce and support each other: formal structure, work process, and decision rights, people, systems, and culture. And then beyond the design elements, you need to think about and plan your change efforts to account for things like mobilization, movement, and sustaining it. Okay. I wanted to go over very quickly kind of where we are in providing you with the tools that you need to take on your capstone project. So here are, again, the summary of the elements of the capstone project that we identified at the very beginning of the course. So basically, the capstone is for you to identify a digital transformation opportunity in your organization and then lay out the elements necessary for that transformation. So the first slide would be to summarize the opportunity. The second slide would be to discuss the prioritization criteria for your particular opportunity. This includes data alignment, cultural alignment, what the right success metrics are. Slide 3 would be the data inventory that would be necessary to enable this digital transformation. Slides 4 and 5 would show the existing swim lane process flow analysis of the process that you want to transform digitally. And then slide 5 would be the transformed swim lane process flow analysis. In slide 6, you would describe an experiment that you would want to set up to test whether this digital transformation has traction. And then slide 7 is optional for those of you who are actually currently engaged in a digital transformation effort and you have some data to share. This would be your opportunity to share your data and the analysis of that data. And what I show here is that all of the things that you need to know to be able to put together the capstone project are now available to you. Once we get through Module 6, you have kind of all of the elements that you need to put your capstone project together. So this is another encouragement to not wait to the last minute on your capstone project, but start putting together the elements now. There's some of you who, for whatever reason, aren't able to use your current company for a capstone project. So in that case, you can either use your experience in this course as a subject of the capstone, or you can think about a digital transformation in a company that's relevant to your interests. That can be a competitor, it can be a client, it can be a supplier, it can be a former employer. And just to reinforce that capstone projects are only viewed by the learning facilitators and by the faculty. They're not shared with any of your other classmates, unless you all work together as a group on a capstone. So in that case, obviously, everyone in your group will have the same capstone. And it's designed to apply what you've learned in the course to advance a digital transformation initiative at your company or organization. Okay, well, that's all that I have today. I'll share a copy of the case study with everyone in section A, and I look forward to seeing more of you on the discussion boards and in your assignment submissions, and I'm really looking forward to the capstone projects that you all will